kickboxing titles don't mean much in MMA. Not only does the kickboxer have to learn wrestling and ground fighting, he also has to adapt his style of striking itself so that he doesn't concede easy clinches or compromise his own balance and positioning. Israel Adesanya's success in mixed martial arts is partly because of his aptitude for wrestling and ground fighting, and partly because his style of kickboxing was better suited to the transition to MMA to begin with. Adesanya didn't much go in for flurries into low kicks or lengthy combinations, and tended to keep his strikes to singles and doubles, yet he kept a high output and the perception of an even higher pace by using many feints. Feints either make fighters flinch at nothing and present openings, or dull their reactions to legitimate strikes. Adesanya also eschewed the high guard and the cover-up for the most part, instead using distancing and movement as his main means of avoiding retaliation. As a kickboxer, Adesanya also relied heavily on the jab. In order to get the most out of it, he would lower his lead hand, stand more bladed than many of his opponents, and use his lead shoulder and slight level changes to feint opponents. Alex Pereira came from a background in boxing, transitioned to kickboxing, and then was thoroughly bamboozled by Adesanya boxing him up in their first fight as he stood tall and put up the double forearms guard while Adesanya danced around him. The low lead hand, reliance on the jab, and use of shoulder feints and level changes to get it going slotted perfectly into Adesanya's MMA game. Then there is Adesanya's switch hitting between southpaw and orthodox to score appropriate attacks off each side. Adesanya would often kick from orthodox to retreat to southpaw just to line up a stiff left kick to the gut. This kick would then be turned into his signature question mark kick. When kicking from orthodox, Adesanya would attack the outside of the lead leg, often without setup. In MMA, the calf kick is ruining everyone's day, but in kickboxing and MMA, Adesanya does this to set up the question mark kick over the lead shoulder. Adesanya gets incredible mileage out of the question mark kick, the shoulder feint, and the hip feint that any other fighter could learn from watching. Most importantly, there is Adesanya's combining of movement with framing, using his hands on the opponent to limit their ability to attack effectively. This can be done by placing a glove on the face, or across the neck, bisecting the opponent as Adesanya gets his chin down behind his lead shoulder. An offensive application of this can be seen against Robert Thomas in Glory, as Adesanya throws his rear hand, frames off Thomas, and bounces out to the side to change stance and attack from a new position. The defensive application you see constantly in MMA, as Adesanya frames on his opponent while retreating before cutting off line. The golden rule of defensive ringcraft is to never take 2 steps straight back, always break off the line of attack. MMA is full of decent technical strikers who still run themselves straight back onto the fence when the opponent attacks them. Adesanya's good defensive habits and awareness of where he is in the cage is an ounce of prevention compared to the pound of cure that is defensive wrestling and breaking free of clinches along the fence. Where Israel Adesanya is about elusive aggression, Paulo Costa is about confrontation. Costa is the definition of a swarmer. From bell to bell he is trying to land as often and as hard as possible. He is almost always at an advantage on strength, and so his concern is in forcing exchanges. To do this, he puts his opponents back to the fence, and this requires some knowledge of cutting the ring. To cut the ring effectively, a fighter must step across to intercept his opponent rather than simply pivoting around and following them. In boxing, a fighter has to use his left hook and a right straight or wide right to create pressure from both sides of his stance. In MMA, fighters have the benefit of the round kick, a much longer weapon, and one which Costa makes terrific use of. Yes, kicking people in the body or head is great, but when you watch MMA's best swarmers use the round kick, it is to stop the opponent in his tracks as he circles along the fence. This allows the kicking fighter to pin his man down momentarily, stepping in with punches afterwards. Once the opponent's footwork has failed him and he has nowhere to retreat, he is often forced into a weaker hitting position with his feet closer together underneath him. While Costa, with his back to the centre of the cage, always has the option of retreating or leaning back onto his rear foot. His opponent's defensive options are limited to covering up, trying to clinch, or trying to circle out while Costa is hitting them. Most are forced to cover up at least momentarily, and then Costa has free rein to hit the body. Getting stuck in a cover-up along the fence, particularly in crunching over to protect the body, and particularly against taller opponents, is also an invitation for the double collar tie and knees to the face. In a strange twist of fate, Costa has met a large number of southpaws in his UFC run. This has allowed him to open up with his rear leg far more readily as he is kicking into the open side. Against southpaws, you will notice Costa get outside foot position and even begin to get closer to the fence on his opponent's right side, encouraging them to run towards the opening and eat the round kick. The one notable orthodox fighter that Costa faced in the UFC was Uriah Hall, in what was arguably Hall's finest performance. The jab proved a nuisance to Costa, and while Hall's own defensive ringcraft is generally bad, walking onto the cage and then circling out with his hands down has been a huge problem throughout his career, Hall was able to move around Costa for much of the fight. Costa was able to score with a step-up left kick to the body instead of his right against the orthodox opponent, but it was often a standalone shot and not a tool to force exchanges along the fence. While he has a passable left hook and will show the odd wild wheel kick, Costa doesn't seem as competent stopping opponents circling out to his left side. Much of this match seems to hinge on ringcraft. Should Adesanya get caught near the fence, as even the best ring generals do from time to time, he will likely need to rely on direction changes to get out. Very, very few fighters in MMA do this well, with Eddie Alvarez and Dominic Cruz being two of them. The ring cutter's job is to apply pressure without overcommitting. The runner's job is to get the ring cutter to commit to a step or strike prematurely and drift out to the opposite side. Direction changes and fakes make this happen. A glaring reality coming into this fight is that Costa hasn't yet faced anyone who was good at staying off the cage to begin with. For Costa, attacking Adesanya's legs should be of primary importance. If you want someone to stop running, kicking them in the legs will slow them down, but even kicking at their legs unsuccessfully can make them pick their foot up to check, and they can't run and check effectively at the same time. Furthermore, Adesanya's retreats and pullaways are incredible if his opponent is obsessed with hitting Adesanya in the head, but his trailing leg is the last thing to leave range. Focusing on that leg might not only allow Costa to pile up some damage and slow Adesanya down in the long run, but also knock him out of position for follow-up attacks in that moment. You will recall that Mauricio Shogun Rua's strategy against Lyoto Machida was to pump hands to get Machida running and kick the trailing leg as it was the last thing to leave range. Along the fence, good ring generals will flatten out their stance and start to side skip in order to be more laterally mobile and to allow them to change directions quickly. Again, the best course of action here is to kick the trailing leg. Costa's teammate Henry Cejudo used this tactic to take out Dominic Cruz. I make these videos for fun and they aren't monetized, but if you want to keep up with my writing and ranting, you can find me at JackSlackMMA on Twitter or FightPrimer.com. Cheers!